the halls where echoes ring, Baker High's veterans sing tales of valor, scars of time. Donald Ray, forever prime. Through the fields of fire and sand, brothers fell, their spirits stand. Each scar a story, each heart so true, bound by bonds they gave for you. Lest we forget their sacrifice, echoes of valor they give through the battles, through the peace, their spirits still forever cease. Memories of laughter, tears and pain. In this place, their courage reigns. Though some returned, some didn't stay, their legacy forever they'll convey. In the shadows of the night, their spirits still take flight. Guardians of freedom, they did fight. In their honor, let us unite. With every step, with every breath, their memory we hold so tight. For the price of freedom they paid, their sacrifice will never fade. Lest we forget their sacrifice, echoes of valor they give through the battles, through the peace, their spirits still forever cease.
Hello, I'm East Nazari. I'm president of the Baker High School Alumni Association. And today we have Mr. Roger Buterbaugh. I hope did I say that right? Well, good. Class of 1972, way after me. And Roger, I want to thank you for joining us today. Roger, when you graduated in 72, I know several of your classmates. They're really involved people. What made you join the service? Did you just join the service, or did you go to college ROTC program?
Well, I was an Army brat, like most of the other students were. Been around the Army all my life, and so to me it just seemed natural to go back into the Army. So of course, 72 was the downsizing of the Army, the Vietnam War, and so forth. So I decided to apply for a 4-year ROTC scholarship, and I guess there weren't that many applicants because they actually picked me. And so I wound up getting a 4-year ROTC scholarship. I started off at North Georgia College in Dahlonega, Georgia. I was there for 3 years, and of course by 1975 the Vietnam War was really winding down. North Georgia being a military college, everybody went to go regular Army, and that was my dream. I wanted to become a regular Army officer, not a reserve officer. So I looked around, and at that time, Columbus College had a brand new ROTC program, and they were turning RA quotas back in because they didn't have the students to fill them, where there was a big fight at North Georgia College for those few RA slots. So I made the decision to transfer to Columbus College for the commission. So I transferred to Columbus College, did my senior year there, and on June 3rd, 1976, I graduated from Columbus College and was commissioned as second lieutenant, regular Army, in the Army.
You know, it's amazing. I almost went to North Georgia College too. My problem was my grades. Yeah, but my best friend, Ken Westner, his brother, Bill Westner, dear friend of mine, Archie Spires, they all went to North Georgia College.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I regret not finishing up that final year, but then on the other hand, my goal all through college was a regular Army commission. Again, being the end of the Vietnam War, people going into the reserves did their basic training, and then they did 2 weeks every year, or excuse me, 2 weeks, once a month or whatever. Anyway, they did the reserve time.
Sure.
I didn't want that. I wanted to be in the Army full-time, so that's why I wanted to get the reserve commission.
So you graduated in 1976, you got your commission, second lieutenant, then what happened?
I went to Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana, where I went to the officer basic course. I was a commissioned and adjutant general corps officer. No, by the way, I was the very first cadet commissioned into the adjutant general corps at Columbus College. So they have branch plaques in the ROTC department with each of the different branches on it and who was commissioned, and my name is number 1 on the AG plaque.
You know, it's just some of them Baker boys, and the girls too. I mean, some of the girls, I mean, you know, it's amazing. It's one thing for sure, now I'm getting off the subject, but I have to say that Baker High was well represented in about every field in the world. Every field in the world.
Yeah.
I lived in, used to live in, I never been to Benjamin Harrison, but I was aware of it.
Okay. So I went to the officer basic course, and of course, by that time I'd already married my bride, and so I told her, marry me and I'll show you the world, because I'm going to go into the United States Army. So our first duty station was Fort Benning. So I really showed her the world. We moved about 2 miles from our house to quarters on Fort Benning. While at Benning, I served first as the Chief of Enlisted Management. I was in the 3rd Quartel, worked there in Fort Benning.
Okay.
Was there for about 18 months, and then I transferred over to, at that time it was called the School Brigade. And I was the S1 of the School Brigade. So then I finally got to keep my promise with my wife, because my next duty station was Fort Richardson, Alaska. And so we went to, I was assigned to the 172nd Infantry Brigade at Fort Richardson, Alaska.
Is Fort Richardson in Anchorage?
It is.
But we just went through there. My wife and I on a cruise, and it was Fort Richardson. I knew some other people had been there. Yeah.
So I started off as a personnel officer in the DPCA, and then I wound up being the deputy chief of military personnel. But it was an interesting time in Alaska. A lot of darkness. When we started seeing the snow come down the mountains in July, we called it termination dust. It was getting ready to go. But I do remember one time we had exercises there called Jack Frost. And so we were getting ready to go on our Jack Frost exercise. We deployed from Fort Richardson to outside of Fairbanks. There was a huge Army training area there. And I remember at the time we were looking at the weather around the world, and at that particular time it was colder in Miami, Florida than it was in Fairbanks, Alaska. And so we thought we should do the operation that year. We should deploy to Miami for our exercise, but they said no. They said we had to go to Fairbanks, so we wound up going to Fairbanks for the training. But it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
You know, yeah, I'm getting off the subject again. My wife and I, we were on a cruise, land tour, and then a cruise. And we went in September, and they was getting ready to close up. And I said, why? I said, let's close the whole thing. So anyway, to make a long story short, almost every day I go to my weather map, and I looked Anchorage and all the way to Vancouver. Good God, how can you survive that thing? You know, you just have to be used to it.
Oh, we loved it. We had a great time there.
You know, when I seen it there myself, I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I did. I liked it, and friends of mine in the Air Force, I was in the Air Force base in Anchorage. They said, "You're gonna like it. You're gonna love it." You know.
Yeah. So from Fort Richardson, Alaska, I went back to Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana for my advanced course. And then I got tagged for recruiting duty, so I also went to recruiting school, except I went to the recruiting commander's course. And I wound up being the S1 of the U.S. Army Recruiting Battalion, Nashville, Tennessee. So spent about 18 months in Nashville with the recruiting battalion when I got tagged to go to Headquarters Recruiting Command at Fort Sheridan, Illinois to be the Chief of Officer Management. And so we moved from Nashville to Fort Sheridan, or as it was so fondly called at that time, Fort Shaky at the Lakey. But you know, one of my memories from there is that Fort Sheridan sits on our quarters sat on a golf course on Fort Sheridan, right next to Lake Michigan, and so we would get the brunt of the lake effect snow. And there was one time we had a snowdrift up to the second floor of our quarters. So we could go out the front door, but we couldn't go out the back door. I don't think we were ever as cold in Alaska as we were in Chicago. That wet cold in Chicago was terrible.
Well, I'll tell you what, I used to live in Owensboro, Kentucky. That's in the Ohio River, right across from Evansville, Indiana. And they talk, all them Chicago people, that's talk about how it is. I said, you need to live in Owensboro, just get it up the river. I know how that can be.
So, so anyway, we went from Fort Sheridan. I wound up going to Fort Rucker, Alabama. I
lived there.
I was the Secretary General Staff for the Commanding General, and then I was the Chief of the Personnel Service Center.
My dad got stationed in Camp Rucker back then. It was in June or July of 1952. And I did not know this. I was just a kid until about 15, 20 years ago. We went to Fort Rucker and to the museum. And while my dad, he was the equivalent of a sergeant major of the post, he was getting that post ready to go to turn over to helicopter school. You know, so we live on the reservation right there, and I still remember those days. And you were talking about recruiters. I got to tell you a quick story about recruiters. I volunteered for the draft first downtown. I couldn't find a job, and so then we went to the recruiter downtown, and we were looking at a thing, and then the sergeant first class recruiter. When you were talking about it, I was thinking about that. He said, "You boys interested in joining the Army?" I said, "Well, we already volunteered for the draft." He said, "We're gonna go airborne. No, you got to join. You got to be RA in those days." And came home. I told my dad. My dad said, "You did what?" He was post sergeant major, and he said, "Let's go downtown." And when we opened them doors, and that's first sergeant said, "That star." You got my boy going to airborne school? Yeah. What's he doing going to Korea afterwards? And boy, I just made a mistake, fixed that up. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take up, but I thought of that.
So anyway, we two stories, or one that I kind of remember out of Fort Rucker. The first was when I was chief of the Personnel Service Center. The Personal Actions branch came under me, which was casualty notification. And you didn't see it a lot in the news, but there were quite a few helicopter crashes in training at Fort Rucker. And word got around real quick among the wives. We actually rented a house in Enterprise. We weren't living on post, but we had a lot of the military around us. And so every time the word got out that the helicopter had gone down, all the neighborhood wives ran over to my wife and said, "Is it my husband? Is it my husband? Is it my husband?" Because they knew that I worked in the casualty office. So that kind of made it hard for her. And oh, by the way, since we're recording this, my wife is sitting right over there. But the second story real quick, the only time I was ever yelled at by a general officer, it was my birthday, and the general's aide said, for your birthday, I'm gonna take you on a helicopter ride. He was an OH-58 pilot. And so we went over to Hanchey. He signed out an OH-58, Kiowa, and we went flying around, and he let me work the controls a few times and kind of fly it a little bit and so forth. And he said, I got an idea. Instead of landing here at the airfield, why don't I land on the parade field in front of the post headquarters? At that time, I was the Secretary General Staff, and I worked in the post headquarters. He said, I'll just land in the parade field in front of the post headquarters, and that way you just walk back on over to the building. Great idea. So we're coming in, I see Donna, and I see, I don't know if I'm allowed to say his name or not,
Yeah, really.
General Wolf. I saw Donna and General Wolf standing at the edge of the parade field watching the helicopter come in. And little did I know that we didn't quite, Kevin, who was the pilot, my friend, didn't quite follow the flight path. And every time a helicopter crashed during training, the headquarters was immediately notified. And so they got word that a 58 had gone down, but they didn't know which one it was. And of course, by that time, we were overdue coming in because of our little extra flying and not quite following the flight plan and everything. And so they thought it might have been us. And so we came in and we landed, and I come running around, and General Wolf lit into me. Why didn't you report in? Why didn't you tell us that you were okay? What's going on? I said, sir, I'm not the pilot. I was a major at the time. I said, I'm not the pilot. Lieutenant McGrath, Kevin McGrath is the pilot. He says, what rank are you? Major. You were the senior officer on that aircraft. It was your responsibility to notify us about your whereabouts and everything. So in front of my wife, I got yelled at by General Wolf. So anyway, so when we finished at Fort Rucker, my next duty assignment was Honolulu, Hawaii.
Oh my goodness.
And more recruiting, because I was the executive officer, and then I commanded the Honolulu Recruiting Battalion.
Okay.
My recruiting area went from the coast of California to Yongsan, Korea, and from American Samoa to Fairbanks, Alaska. So when I went out to inspect my recruiting stations, I was gone up to 2 weeks, because I'd fly, for example, I would fly from Honolulu to American Samoa, to Guam, to Saipan, to the Philippines, to Korea, to visit and inspect all of my recruiting stations. And I was gone so much, my wife put my picture on the refrigerator to make sure my daughters didn't forget what I looked like.
Let me ask you this right here. Excuse me for Did you fly commercial?
Yes.
A civilian? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you were in uniform and you're coming back into Honolulu, you did not have to go through customs. They just waved you around and you continued on. So when I would fly from Japan back to Honolulu, when word got out that I was going TDY to Korea, the neighborhood wives came and said, hey, can you give me a Reebok tennis shoes? Can you give me a Lace Claiborne purse? Because everything, the cheap knockoffs in Korea. And our recruiting station was located adjacent to Yongsan, which is the big shopping area. So I would take my regular suitcase and an empty suitcase, and then while I was in Korea, I would buy stuff for my shopping list. I even bought, for my family, I bought us a real nice men and women's Rolex watch for $25.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's.
So when I came back to Honolulu, then I just walked through customs with my suitcase and brought everything home. So hopefully the police will not come now and arrest me for illegal importing. Maybe I should have told that story.
No.
So anyway, the Army decided to deactivate the Honolulu Recruiting Battalion because it was a little bit too expensive to maintain, and they put all of the recruiters under the San Francisco Recruiting Battalion. So I wound up being reassigned to be the DeVarty S1 at the 25th Infantry Division at Schofield Barracks. It's got me some muddy boots time. So I wound up spending the next 2 years or so as the DeVarty S1 at Schofield. And the thing I remember most about that is that we were set up in a task force concept. We had the infantry brigades, and then they had their own assigned artillery battalion and medical unit and so forth. Our Divarti commander believed that whenever a task force deployed to the Pohakaloa training area on the big island of Hawaii, that the Divarti staff should go as well to support it. So I would wind up like a week in Schofield Barracks, and then like 3 weeks on the big island, and then a week at Schofield, and then like 3 weeks on the big island. The Pohakaloa training area sat right in the center of the big island. We would, for firing, we would put our guns against Mauna Loa and shoot against Mauna Kea.
Where was exactly Schofield Barracks located?
In the exact center of Oahu.
Is that right?
And the reason it was picked in the exact center is because it was equal distance to the coast. So if the Oahu was ever invaded, you could, equal distance, you could
I seen it.
respond anywhere in the same amount of time.
When I lived in Indiana, I met 2 soldiers that were at church, coming out of church, December 7th, 1941.
So anyway, Pohakaloa training area, since it's volcano and with all the artillery fire over there, you had all of the lava, and then the artillery kind of ground it up into dust. And that area is so desolate that when NASA decided to test the lunar land rover before they landed on the moon, they tested it at the Pohakaloa training area because they said that area best represents the surface of the moon than any other place.
I have a friend, now he was dumber than I was at Baker. He barely graduated, barely made it to college, only to become the head of NASA. And we talked about that, we were talking about that, yeah.
So going back and forth to the Pohakaloa training area, we call it PTA for short, was interesting. I remember one time we flew over and C-130 pilot, National Guard was there for their 2 weeks of training or whatever, and they said, we haven't done a combat landing in a long time. So when we get into PTA, let's do a combat landing. So we came in over the Pohakaloa training area, and then just did a spiral all the way down, and then smacked onto the runway. And that was interesting.
At C-130?
Uh-huh.
Well, I never heard about them doing that.
Oh, yeah. So, and I know because I was in the back of the C-130 when that was happening. And then there was another time that we flew over. They landed at the airfield at Hilo, but for some reason there was a snafu, as always happens in the Army, and there was nobody there to pick us up. So the C-130 landed, offloaded us on the end of the runway, and then took off. And so there we were at the end of a runway at Hilo Airport with at that time Humvees and troops and whatever, stuck on the end of the airfield. So we had to call up to the PTA and have them send some folks down to get us out of the airfield and get us over to the area. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, the last, after Hawaii, my next duty station was DC. My next duty station was DC. I was first assigned to the U.S. Army Personnel Command. We always called it the Chief Human Resources Division of the United States Army. And then after that, I was assigned over to the Pentagon. And I was Chief of Recruiting Policy at the Pentagon. So my branch's job was not only to come up with the mission for the recruiting command, but we would monitor their mission each month. And for example, if they were supposed to enlist so many 1 to 3As and they didn't meet their goal, then we would adjust their mission the next month to increase the number of 1 to 3As and lower this.
What rank were you there?
Lieutenant Colonel.
Okay.
So that was my last assignment in the Army, because at that point, I'd spent 4 years in DC, 2 at PERSCOM and 2 at the Pentagon, so it's time for me to go. My daughter was a junior in high school, and I said, leave me here 1 more year, until she finishes high school, and then I'll go anywhere in the world that you want. So I was one metro stop away from my assignment officer, so I just rode the metro back and forth to see him. And he said, no, I've got this critical assignment in Saudi Arabia that I got to fill, and you're ready to move, so I'm going to send you to Saudi Arabia. I said, I do not want to go to Saudi Arabia. Send me someplace else. I do not want to go to Saudi Arabia. No, this is a critical vacancy. And oh, by the way, you can take your family with you. And I said, so what am I going to do with my family in Saudi Arabia for 2 years?
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, let me think about it. So I went home and talked to my wife, and I talked to my dad, retired Army. And they said, well, maybe it was time for me to retire while I was still young and good looking. So I went the next, I typed up my retirement application at night, and the next morning took the metro over to PersCom and said, I pick option B. He said, well, I didn't give you an option B. I said, here it is. And I laid my retirement paperwork on his desk. And then all of a sudden, all these other jobs just opened up on places he can send me. And I said, no, it's time for me to retire. So at that time, I had 20 years, 3 months, and 28 days in the Army. And I said, maybe this is just a sign that I need to retire. So fortunately, I wasn't on orders yet, so I could put my retirement application in 1 year out. So put my retirement application in, spent my last year at the Pentagon, and retired, moved back to Columbus.
Is that right? So what year did you retire?
1996.
1996. I was still living in Indiana. I was in business. I had my own company at that time. Right, you had an exciting, interesting career.
Unfortunately, I didn't get to shoot anybody, or
Well,
I didn't serve in a combat zone anywhere.
You know,
but
it's amazing. Listening to the officers and to the enlisted men, I understand that exactly why. Officers to direct, to direct, plan things. Us is just go in and do it, you know. Colonel, I swear to goodness, what's they named a highway after him. I can't. My mind's going.
Colonel Nett.
Colonel Nett, Bob Nett. I did. Just so happened when I came down here, and I seen an ad in the paper. I was planning on retiring. Okay, needed fire alarm technician, and I've worked on them too. And now, of course, I'm a master electrician too in 3 states. Anyway, so I called. They hired me right to the phone. You know. And I used to go to to the chapel, and Colonel Nett, he'd be there. Never knew that he was a colonel. Never knew anything about him until later on. But I remember him telling me, he says, you know, I don't deserve the Medal of Honor when it's my guys that did it, you know. And I know who he's talking about. But he was just, he praised the enlisted men. He told me exactly what his job was. He said, but then I had to be stupid enough to get in front and get shot, you know.
well, my father taught me the importance of NCOs, and he said the only thing higher than a sergeant major is a general officer. And so I took my dad's advice, and I utilized my NCOs and soldiers to the best of my ability. I used to remember one time, formation at Schofield Barracks had one of the soldiers in formation who, let's just say, wasn't up to speed and wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. And I was getting ready to call him down, and the first sergeant said, don't worry, sir, I'll take care of it. And he grabbed him and took him behind the building, and I don't know what conversation they had behind the building, but I do know that he was straight as a rod when he came back around.
You know, like you being an Army brat,
I'm up at Cook's.
we only have one car in the family, you know, and I took Dad to work. At that time, he was with 29th Infantry, and I walked in and to the orderly room, and he said, "You don't want to walk in there. Your dad is busy with 2 officers," and they were telling me, I just didn't realize how much power Sergeant Major had until I went to the Army. And then in 1964, we became brigades. And I tell you what, all the NCOs, Mike, boy, they had a lot of respect. And And we had a good sergeant major. He used to kid me all the time, you know. But because he knew my dad, you know, he knew my dad from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, you know. Well, Vietnam wasn't here then, but World War II and Korea. Roger, you know, it's interesting. It's interesting. What was your final rank?
I retired as a lieutenant colonel.
Did you? Well, that makes that makes 3 lieutenant colonels that retire. One is a dear friend of mine. He, well, we could talk about that all the time. Robert, I want to thank you for coming over
I
here.
appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
You know, it's amazing. Paul Voorhees, that's Ranger Joe's dear friend of mine. I'll tell you, but I don't tell him. But anyway, we used to interview people, folks like that, and that's how I got started with veterans. And just want to thank you so much. And we're gonna do this again, and I'm gonna invite everybody to come on. And what we have is a chit chat session, and then everybody just breaks in, you know. And I did that once, and then some of the people that were watching it, that were veteran, you guys talking about that? It brought back memories. You know, it brought back memories. You know, when you were talking about that operation in Alaska at Fort Campbell. Have you ever been to Fort Campbell by any chance?
Yes, when I was with the National Recruiting Battalion, our supporting installation was Fort Campbell.
Well, that you know why they call it Fort Campbell, Kentucky, because the headquarters buildings is on the Kentucky side. Most of Fort Campbell's on the Tennessee side, full of blackheads, copper heads, and all kinds of snakes right there. But we had an Operation Cold Eagle, and the 327, that's my unit. We were the aggressor for the entire, and that place can get a cold. So, you know, it's funny how the Army gives names, you know, Cold Eagle. I remember the council while we were out in the field, and then our squad leader, Sergeant, told him, get a tan, get a buddy, and next thing I know, we had a foot of snow. We were on the foot of snow, you know, so. Thank you again. You know, we can talk about other things here, but we can talk about it, but I think you got things to do too. And I want to thank you and your wife for coming over here.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And we're going to do this again.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Folks, that's it for us this
You're
time.
supposed to yell, cut!
Yeah, that's it for us. And
sorry.
We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Sorry, I yelled cut too soon.
That's okay.